Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I don't actually apologize for the hiatus for once because I did warn you. Plus, it was just 5 days, which is much shorter than I anticipated. I apologize for telling you I would be streaming at like 5:10 p.m. Now it's 5:25 or something like that. Basically, I needed a little bit longer to get from work than I expected. But nevertheless, I am here and we do have some pretty big Apple leaks to cover. Now, I, for the most part, anticipated that it would be mostly silent up until the actual event, maybe with some bigger leaks right before the event. But seems like Apple is actually dropping the ball a little bit on their secrecy, and there's a lot of secret code that's getting revealed and showing us what kind of products we can expect this fall in the near term future and even beyond that. So you guys can understand if I couldn't quite ignore that. We already have Rosa in the live chat saying hi, hello to everyone. I hope the algorithm still recommends you my stuff. I know this can be a big issue with live streams when somebody is on a somewhat irregular schedule like I am. So I appreciate each and everyone who makes their way to the live streams, watches the videos of odds, leaves comments, leaves likes, subscribe to the channel, and everything else that I encourage you guys to do around here. That should be quite enough big mark action up front. We have a decently packed stream with just the Apple leaks to cover, but that's actually not all there is. Yesterday, we got a new release of iOS 27, iPadOS 27, macOS 27, and more. These are the developer beta 6 releases. They're actually quite interesting because we are now finally switching to a weekly rollout schedule rather than to a bi-weekly one. We also have official releases of iOS 26.6.1 and macOS 26.6.2. We have new iPhone camera rumors, and obviously we have more details about those products than just their code names that we're going to be discussing today. And I would like to react to Marquez's review of the Galaxy Z Fold 8. Which is basically the product that is going to be the most direct competitor to Apple's upcoming iPhone Ultra, which by all accounts is very likely launching in September alongside the iPhone 18 Pro and 18 Pro Max. Even if there is some small delay, maybe some regional release variants, by which I mean it comes out in September in the US, in October in Europe, or stuff like that, right? We are definitely getting Apple's first foldable this year. It's definitely this passport-like design that we are seeing here on the Galaxy Z Fold 8, not the Z Fold 8 Ultra. So I think that's a very good device to have in comparison to have in your head for the time when the iPhone Ultra actually releases. As I warned you, my time right now is pretty busy, so my biggest coverage of the iPhone 18 Pro, Pro Max, and Ultra will actually be followed up in October, and in September I'll just try to at least find time to react live to the introduction of those products. As always, before we get fully started with all those news, all those rumors, all those leaks, all those discussions, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. Leave a like, it helps tremendously. Share the video out with anybody else who you think might enjoy it. Comment live. I love getting your opinions, your agreements, your disagreements in the comment section. Just say hi if you want to. It really helps. And if you want to support this channel permanently directly, consider becoming a channel member right here on YouTube or a supporter over on Patreon. Shout out to our supporters. Shout out to Angelica, Steve, Max, Maximus, and Jonathan, our MarkTech Pro Max supporters. Shout out to Denise, our MarkTech Pro supporter. And shout out to KSB Wonder, our MarkTech Neo supporter. I checked the numbers. That should still be the correct list. If I forgot anyone, you can let me know. And hey, if you unsubscribed and I named you, I don't think that's a bad thing either, right? So without further ado, let's get started with some of the immediate stuff that is happening in the world of Apple recently. Let's talk about iOS 27 beta 6, macOS 27 beta 6. So basically, they just came out yesterday on Monday. Before that, we got the beta 5 the week before, but that actually had a 3-week gap with beta 4. Beta 5 got quite a decent amount of nice features, some icon changes and things like that, a lot of visual refinements, really good stuff. Had some hiccups for me personally. There was a major Spotlight search bug where the keyboard just simply wouldn't pop up, and an iMessage, like you fixed like your favorite contacts that you have on top, they actually were covered up by that like transparent UI bar on top, and you couldn't actually tap on the highest row. So that is all fixed in 27 beta 6. Thankfully, there are still some minor UI issues maybe here and there, but by large, I consider developer beta 6 very much release candidate worthy, and we are a full month or so away, maybe like 20 days from the actual release. More closer though to a full month. Plasma Void joined the chat, and speaking of the developer betas, asking me if I enjoy the liquefied aqua style traffic icons. Now, for all those of you who don't know, you should follow my cursor. You see it's big here, and now it's moving into the left corner. That shouldn't be covered up by anything. You see the traditional Apple traffic lights, red, yellow, and green. Obviously for stuff like closing the window, minimizing it, and multitasking controls. What you see here, of course, is that they are much more glossy, much more glassy, much more aqua, if you wanted Plasma Void style, than before. They're also a little bit more playful. If you grab one, you will see that they move and jiggle a little. Now, I've seen some people, including a good friend of the channel, Jimmy James, complain about that. I do have to say, though, I find it quite fun. And if you actually try to move them around based on like your cursor still being in the near vicinity, you'll find that it doesn't actually do much or anything for that regard. And if you just click the buttons, obviously they don't move around, right? But basically, that's another UI element of Apple's that has gotten liquid glass after Stephen LeMay took over from Alan Dye. So to all those people who believe that Stephen LeMay would come in and actually undo everything Alan Dye did with liquid glass and similar changes, forget it. It seems like LeMay's team is absolutely bought into liquid glass. They're just looking to refine it, actually add it across even more of the operating system. 27 beta 5 actually made the more clear option at the far end even more transparent than it was before. So liquid glass is not going away, but if you want to, you can now customize it. Plasma Void. I really like these changes. As you guys know, I'm a big fan of liquid glass in general. Do I have zoom enabled in macOS accessibility settings? To be quite honest, I don't really play around with that many accessibility settings. I use like reduce white point, like when it's dark and I want my display to be even dimmer than it is at the lowest possible setting. Especially on my iPad, because like those mini LED panels, they just don't get as dim as I would like. That's definitely one reason to potentially consider tandem OLED that goes down to 1 nit, similar to the latest iPhone panels. And I think that's mostly it of what I use pretty regularly. If something comes up, I'll let you know, but I don't think I use Zoom. Here's some changes. Pinned messages, the bug is fixed. Updated iOS notification animation. If you want to see that, you'll see it actually moves quite smoothly into the corner now. That looked a little bit flimsy before, so that's quite nice. Redesigned stoplight window controls. We obviously talked now quite a bit about them. Updated preview icon on the Mac, which obviously you guys have seen from the 27 beta 5. That was not in macOS 27 beta 5, but iOS. Now it's also on macOS. You get this beautiful liquid glass based icon. macOS previously had already gotten stuff like the new Safari icon that you see down there, the new Siri icon. So in that regard, the preview icon was the last one missing of the new ones. In addition to that, Golden Gate and Golden Gate Evening Dynamic Wallpapers join sunset and night version. So that's quite a large portfolio. Just so you can see here, this is actually the night version. This is obviously just a regular still image, but it animates as I don't think needs that much explanation. Here you can see all of them side by side. Overall, a very smooth release, very battery efficient. Device doesn't get hot. There are no crazy instabilities or anything like that. So once the public beta for that is out, I quite recommend it. I'm digging the liquid glass refinements, icon changes. I do too. I've seen people like joking, "Oh, I haven't updated my Mac in 12 years," right? Because so many are saying they will be upgrading straight from macOS 15 to macOS 27. So they basically skipped 26 because they did not like what Apple was doing with Tahoe, and now they're very much liking the refinements for liquid glass and certain changes like the sidebar change UI elements and things like that, readability adjustments with liquid glass in general, but also now especially with this slider in the settings app. So there's quite a lot going on here. Now, of course, if you don't want to play with betas, but you obviously want to still stay secure on your devices, I recommend you guys go out and download iOS 26.6.1 and macOS Tahoe 26.6.2 with nearly 30 security vulnerabilities being fixed. This is Apple's third security release in 3 weeks as AI surfaces bugs faster than the company's typical release schedule can absorb. This is a combination of AI unearthing bugs, but also helping them fix them. And obviously with bugs, we're also talking about security vulnerabilities. I actually think that that's probably going to be the best use case for AI. Just tell your LLM, especially if it's a good one, just hack the fucking system. Do it however you can, right? Sometimes they seem to do it on accident. And once you've unearthed it, I would argue that probably most of Apple's engineers are capable of fixing it. They just need to know that it's there. But if the AI is already there, you just tell it, give me a few suggestions to fix it. And hopefully if the code is not totally crazy, which that sometimes is the case with AI code. But if it suggests something sensible, you can rewrite it more in the style that other Apple engineers will be more familiar with as well. That's one downside with AI. The AI can just come up with something that is so new and innovative that nobody can work with it. And then the AI itself cannot really work with it because it did like 20 innovative styles at once. And then the code somehow works, but you're also not sure if any extra line of code will completely disrupt the system. So this is where Apple still seems to be really good, unlike Microsoft that has had really big issues with, in my opinion, with apps being way too slow, way too unresponsive, especially given the fact that we are looking at like 6 gigahertz desktop CPU sometimes. We do have ads in those apps, like even like a basic app like weather will take like 6 to 10 seconds to load with the new code enhancements. And those code enhancements are just put the CPU at max clock speeds. They're not yet, make the app actually more efficient. So whatever Microsoft has been doing over the last couple of years with saying, 30-40% of our code is AI generated, I would probably bet it's closer to like 60% or something like that at this point. It seems like Apple is managing that much better than Microsoft, and Google has done pretty well for themselves. I've always put Google on a much larger pedestal than Microsoft, to the point where, well, I wouldn't even consider Microsoft on any kind of pedestal for myself. But yeah, I would still put Apple above Google and Microsoft, with Microsoft being very, very distinctly removed from the other two. macOS 20 are both pretty damn solid at the moment. That's nice to hear. That's because so many in my community are obviously enthusiasts. They tend to have betas installed. I actually don't hear that much about official releases. So hearing that these releases are actually going beyond just security fixes, but also seem to be very battery stable, very non-hot, to say, to put it mildly, that's good. Apple also released iOS 18.7.10, not 0.10, and iPadOS 18.7.10. This is for devices that are unable to run iOS 26 and iPadOS 26. For example, like my iPhone XS Max here that I use as a secondary device to communicate, while my iPhone 17 Pro Max is used for continuity camera or some other stuff. Yeah, so whether you're into official releases or into betas, you are getting some pretty high quality releases right now, and yeah. Go out and update, basically. Unless you're in the public beta, then I think you're still waiting for iOS 27, macOS 27, like the latest beta that's based on the developer beta 6. So, but obviously you will see it in the settings app once the time has come. Now let's actually get to the iPhone 18 Pro Max, because I do want to cover some hardware leaks that are interesting, because they do change our perspective from some previous streams. And that is, this is actually a rumor that is kind of resurrected every couple of years. If you remember, for example, the iPhone 12 Pro Max versus the iPhone 12 Pro, you will remember that the iPhone 12 Pro Max had slightly different camera features. It had a larger main sensor, and I believe it had a different zoom range, slightly different for its telephoto camera, right? Ever since then, mostly cameras have been kind of one-to-one. There has been some change when the iPhone 15 Pro Max introduced 5x telephoto cameras and things like that. But for the most part, especially the main cameras have been the same between the Pro and the Pro Max variants. But basically every year, we've also gotten continuous leaks saying, well, this year it might finally change. Well, we are now getting to that in regards to the iPhone 18 Pro and 18 Pro Max. Saying that they might actually have pretty meaningfully different camera systems. So not just, in fact, some difference in just the main camera, but also, again, with the telephoto. Here's what leaker Ice Universe says. He says that the two new telephoto lens features may be exclusive to the iPhone 18 Pro Max. The Pro Max model may exclusively feature 6x optical zoom and a more advanced 5 refraction prism technology, while the Pro version might offer 5 to 6x zoom. This is not the biggest change, but then again, there might be a difference in the optical quality at that range as well. We do not know if there are any sensor changes that would go alongside them. I also have to say, I'm not a massive fan of the idea of 6x optical zoom without variable zoom. So if you gave me like 3 to 6x, I would be extremely happy. That would be basically exactly what I want. If you start at 6x, that kind of makes me actually more appreciative of the camera on the regular 18 Pro, because I consider like 4x to me is in many ways perfect. What I want more is a higher quality sensor, a wider aperture to let in more light and improve low light conditions, right? Do all that stuff. do I need that much more zoom range than I can already get from 4x plus a 2x digital zoom that essentially comes out to 8x? I'm not sure, to be quite honest. If accurate, this would mean you'll need to buy the Pro Max model if you want the greatest reach from the telephoto lens, as well as the best low light performance. Now, this is interesting because best low light performance, so I assume this goes with the 5 refraction prism technology. This does not cover if the wider aperture that's rumored for the 18 Pro camera for the telephoto would also only then apply to just the Pro Max. Though that's not identical to the prism setup. The prism setup basically is how lenses you have for like the zoom, they don't necessarily reflect just how open your camera is to letting in light. I apologize for the very oversimplified not understanding explanation of camera tech, but it just really doesn't make sense to go into much more detail than that. The 17 Pro Max is so damn good. 18 will be a great refinement year for great design. I've argued with people until I was red in the face, plasma void. I love the design of the 17 Pro Max. I love the aluminum unibody design. Sure, could there be some refinements to make it more durable? Yeah, sure. I guess it's not titanium, but I also don't give a fuck, to be quite honest. Like, I care about the fact that it's relatively light. I care about the fact that it feels super smooth with that unibody. I love the fact that it's super helpful with thermals, especially as our devices keep getting more and more powerful. We keep pushing max brightness on the screens. We keep pushing 5G capabilities and Wi-Fi capabilities and so much more. I absolutely love the 17 Pro Max in so many ways. And there's so much good happening with the 18 Pro Max that we have already covered, like the larger battery, the huge vapor chamber, all the camera refinements, the 2 nanometer processor, the WMCM RAM packaging. There's just so much coming one after the other. It feels like one of the most solid S-tier upgrades ever, and certainly in a long time. It has also been suggested that the variable aperture system for the main camera might be exclusive to the Pro Max. So I actually, when I initially set up this video, I was actually suspecting that I was mostly going to cover the fact that the telephoto camera would be different based on this report. But that also now led some credence to some leakers saying that the Pro Max model has variable large aperture materials, and the 48mm telephone also has a wider aperture. So that's the actual leak. Mostly focusing here, of course, on the Pro Max models. There seems to be some recent corroboration of that, especially for the more flimsy telephoto rumors that have not cropped up too much in recent times, while the main variable aperture, variable aperture main camera, that has always tended to maybe cover more just the Pro Max than the Pro. Again, I'm not here to confirm or deny. It's a few reports here and there. It's our usual suspects: fixed focus digital chat station, right? Those Weibo leakers. I have not yet seen Ming-Chi Kuo or Mark Gurman commit to specific model differentiations here, but it does seem like we should expect at least some. Will it concern both the telephoto and the main camera? Will it concern only one of the cameras? We'll ultimately have to see. Will Apple even cover those cameras in a very in a very different way? Because if they have variable aperture on one camera, but on the Pro Max, but not the Pro, then I very much think that they will mention that. But if, for example, the telephoto differences are like, oh, one is like 5x, the other is 6x, I could almost see Apple just doing that in like a throwaway sentence, saying like, oh, you know what? The Pro Max has actually our furthest away zoom ever, which would be what? Like if 100 millimeter is 4x, it would be like 6x would be 150, and 5x would be like 125 or something like that. Basically, returning to like the 120 millimeter that we've had already before. So I think that Apple will be able to mostly hide that without making the base Pro look that much worse. But they will have one or two sentences that state that the Pro Max is better, which enthusiasts already tend to buy the Pro Max models anyway. The larger battery, the better cooling, thanks to the larger body. There is a lot that comes in together for just $100 more. This year, it could actually be one of the biggest gaps ever, especially if you remember the battery leaks that we've covered, where the battery for the Pro model is kind of not increasing much at all, while on the Pro Max it's increasing by like 10%. And the 17 Pro Max already had a bit of a lead versus the 17 Pro, so that should just further differentiate those products. That being said, that's pretty much our most concrete hardware coverage of today, because next we're actually going to consider a huge leak, because there's also, except for the official release of macOS Tahoe 26.6.2, there's also a release candidate for macOS Tahoe 26.7. And with that, Apple seems to have put a lot of references to unreleased products in the code. And that concerns everything from iPhones, iPads, AirPods, and Macs. But then it goes even further, especially for AirPods, as you might guess from the thumbnail that I put on this video. First, let's cover the home accessory situation, because that one is interesting. So for my personal disappointment, I have to mention first that there doesn't seem to be a big HomePod here. So there's a new HomePod Mini labeled as B525 as a successor to the B520 HomePod Mini, right? We've also heard, we also even have some color leaks for the upcoming, what's most likely going to be the HomePod Mini. So that makes sense. We have a home accessory, J229. It could be Apple's security camera or some other kind of home accessory that Apple has been working on. There's a reference to Pebble, which Bloomberg previously said was Apple's codename for the HomeOS operating system that runs on the Home Hub, which brings us to the main accessory here, actually, which is the J490 or Home Accessory 17.1 and 17.2. There are references to Siri setup for the home accessory. This is most likely Apple's Home Hub, or HomePad as we call it, because it's basically going to be a HomePod with an attached screen. And the reason why there are two products there, one under J490 and one under J491, is that there will be a Home Hub with a base and then one that you can mount to a wall. So that's going to be interesting, how those differ. With the base, it's at least according to initial rumors, it pointed towards it being like a Pixar lamp situation where it would swivel and adjust, like, for example, for a FaceTime call. That way it's like perfectly centered and stuff like that. Not sure how that's going to play out, especially without making this product unreasonably expensive. Apple definitely likes to charge for their premium mechanical parts. If you guys remember stuff like the Pro Display XDR stand and stuff like that. But hopefully at least the version that's mountable to a wall will have a nice price difference and will make it a little bit easier to swallow. I myself would just like a HomePad, a HomePod without a screen. That's just a good successor to the current big HomePod with the latest chips and hopefully Siri AI capabilities, just so that I can officially move on from my first generation HomePod. But apparently that's not going to be the case, unfortunately. Okay, there are some mystery colors. The colors are rose, pink, silver, space gray, and starlight. We're very likely looking at new colors for the HomePod Mini here. Who knows? Maybe it's the HomePod Hub as well, but we are not sure. There's a Home Accessory 17.3, so that's comes after the Home Hub. Supposedly, that's Apple's in development tabletop robot. That does not mean it's actually going to see the light of day and it's going to release anytime soon. It could be just Apple internally testing it, but it's still interesting that it's there. Audio accessory visual reasoning. There's an audio accessory visual reasoning string, which could be for the Home Hub, which yeah, I don't have much to say about that. Obviously, I wouldn't call this like I wouldn't say this is worthy of inclusion in like this checklist. With iPhone, it's very clear. Basically, we have the iPhone 18, which most likely is launching in spring 2027. That's the V67. The iPhone Ultra, labeled as V68, that's Apple's foldable iPhone, has already been identified under this code name for a while, as far as I understand. This one is coming alongside the 18 Pro Max and the 18 Pro Max and the 18 Pro, which have also been identified for a while as V63 and V64. And in addition to that, there's also the iPhone Air 2, which is most likely going to launch alongside the base iPhone 18 in the spring of 2027. And that also follows a already known naming scheme of V62. There is no iPhone 18e here in the list, but obviously I don't think that macOS 26.7 does need to be a completely exhaustive and 100% complete list when it comes to future iPhones. Obviously, these devices are gonna launch by that time with like iOS 27.3, maybe 0.4. So if something is missing there, does not actually mean that it's not coming, even in the near-term future. iPad, there's the iPad mini, most likely the OLED version, and either an A19 Pro or some kind of A20 processor. We have two versions. That's usually for iPad. That means one is the Wi-Fi version, one is cellular. Obviously, we know that Apple is working on a new entry-level base iPad, and for all we know, an M6 iPad Pro shouldn't be that out of the question in the future, or maybe even an M7 version, but it's not in this code at the very least. There's new Macs, which this actually lends credence to previous leaks and rumors that we've covered here. So let's talk about the iMac. J833 and J834 are the code names for new iMac models is working on. Hopefully there's finally a new size. Hopefully there's finally an OLED variant or something like that. Though the suggestion is that even once Apple switches to OLED, Apple is currently pre-ordering 24-inch displays. So you guys can guess how excited I am for this. I really don't know what exactly Apple is doing with the iMac. Now, for the MacBook Pro, there's a very interesting one, which also makes a lot of sense with prior rumors. It's the J804. It's the successor to the J704, which is the current M5 MacBook Pro, suggesting that we are talking about the entry-level 14-inch MacBook Pro with the M6 chip. So for a while, we've now known that there is not going to be an M6 Pro and M6 Max chip, and basically that the higher-end MacBook Pro is going to keep the M5 Pro and M5 Max for the next year until the M7 Pro and M7 Max chips come out. But what we are getting instead is an M6 MacBook Pro with the current design. That's this one. And we're getting an OLED redesign for the more premium models, but with technically older but more high-end chips. And these are devices labeled as K114C, K114S, K116C, and K116S. Now, from the 114C, 116C. You can guess that these are references to the numbers. This would be the 16-inch variants, and this would be the 14-inch variants. Most likely, we're looking at OLED devices with tandem OLED screens, and as I said before, M5 Pro and M5 Max chips. I wonder if the variants could mean we might finally see some difference in terms of 5G support, or if there's some other reason for why there would be C and S variants of those specific devices. Maybe different screen setups or something like that, but for now, I really couldn't tell you. There's also a new headset in the works. Bloomberg previously said N109 was the second generation Vision Pro, while the information said it was a cheaper version of the Vision Pro, like a Vision Air. Supposedly that one was canceled last year, so the fact that an N109 device is included in this list unfortunately does not mean that it's immediately going to be actually releasing, though there is some code suggesting that that Apple at least worked on a new headset that included newer LiDAR sensors. So we know, for example, that the iPhone 15 Pro Max switched to a new generation of LiDAR sensors, and we know that both the original M2 Apple Vision Pro and the M5 version still use an older generation LiDAR sensor, or multiple of those. So could that be the case? Maybe it could be a silent update where it's just M5 Vision Pro but with new LiDAR sensors, because maybe Apple's old supply ran out and it just makes more sense to produce them with the newer sensor that's said to be more efficient and more higher resolution. But honestly, I couldn't tell you from this, as you might imagine. Apple TV Remote, as you guys can see, I'm working myself up to new AirPods with cameras. Apple TV Remote 1.5. I actually think I called it Apple TV with new Siri Remote in my title. So I forgot that it's not anymore called the Siri Remote, which is funny. Yeah, but there's a reference to an Apple TV Remote 1.5. I doubt that it's going to have the most meaningful changes. Rumors previously suggested the next Apple TV could come with an updated remote control. What the exact differences would be, we don't know. It could be as simple as a new Bluetooth chip for lower latency, longer battery life, and things like that. Maybe some slightly different button placements, maybe some kind of LED for the buttons so that it's easier to use in low light in the evening or something like that. But nothing crazy has been rumored thus far. There are references to writing tools coming to China. We know that Apple is pushing for the release of Apple Intelligence in China, and they're cooperating with regional partners. So they do have some warnings here, like unable to edit this text, content safety update required, writing tools are temporarily restricted due to triggering safety alerts multiple times. China is a very restrictive market, and Apple is a company that prides itself on reducing things like porn, basically, in general. This would be fine for me, the latter. Political, actually, influence on content and AI generation, that I find much more troublesome. But then again, China is a totalitarian one-party communist state. So what do you expect? Apple has to navigate that shit somehow. And yes, there's a myriad of other Apple devices. This is why I always say that Apple is working on so many prototypes and different designs that it's honestly hard to really accurately report on for journalists. So this is one area where I give people like Mark Gurman and Minchi Kuo a lot of slack. If they report on something that's just, you know what, it's some kind of prototype Apple has, they themselves aren't sure if they're actually going to launch it. And hey, I myself have been wrong in assessing what might be just a prototype and never see the light of day, and what could actually be a final, like a product that will ultimately come out and will see some success. In fact, there will be one tiny apology by me towards Mark Gurman today. So that's going to be great. But yeah, you see there is a ton of devices here, most likely devices that are being prototyped and tested right now, maybe some not even under the actual code name that they will have later, with stuff like device 1, 8 234, 236, 238, right? They might actually change their naming later on as they become much more closer to production. So these numbers and letters tell us, unfortunately, very little, though it, of course, would be cool. Now, we do know that Apple works on a myriad of home accessory devices right now that they want to improve. Obviously, Apple has a lot of accessories in general. So, and yeah, future facing products, M7 MacBook Pro, that's going to combine like the OLED design of the premium versions now on the base version, M7 Pro, M7 Max versions, new iPad Pros, new iPad Airs, new base level iPad, right? iPhones into looking into the future beyond the 18 generation, right? There's just so much that it's impossible to say which of those are any of those devices. But of course, the main topic of today are headphones. Let's start with the less interesting one. Beats B518 and B522 could reference upcoming Beats headphones. AirPods Pro 4, not too surprising. There's a reference to AirPods Pro 1.4, which could be 4th generation AirPods Pro. The current AirPods Pro are 1.3. There's also a reference to AirPod 3.5. Not sure how that is going to play into it. There's also some rumors there about, there's also, I believe later came out that there are also some numbers regarding the base AirPods as well. So like in AirPods 5, for example. But this is not very surprising. AirPods Pro 4 is a bit surprising to me. But that only unfortunately lends credence to a rumor that I have been pretty dismissive of for a while. And that is, yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about AirPods Ultra coming with AI focused cameras. They're labeled as B790. They're AirPods that come with a camera, according to Bloomberg. Confusingly, these are not the camera-equipped AirPods rumored for 2027, because those have a B798 code name, but are a separate camera AirPods project. This is absolutely crazy. And you, just to my sanity, just to tell you, like, those AirPods with a camera were supposed to come out late next year, the B798, and I have mostly dismissed it because I thought that Apple would dismiss the idea of camera-enabled AirPods for similar reasons for how they never made camera-enabled Apple Watches. It's a little bit creepy, it's privacy questionable, it will have battery and cost-making impacts, right? But apparently, yes, Apple is working with AirPods on AirPods with cameras, and in fact, one pair of those is very likely launching next month. And since Apple does have a separate name for a next generation of AirPods Pro, which my best case scenario is that Apple will continue making AirPods Pro with all the latest features, the latest chips, the latest Bluetooth, the latest efficiency, the latest audio quality, the latest microphones, the latest ANC quality. And then they would just have an AirPods Ultra on top of that adds only cameras and maybe a slightly larger battery to deal with the cameras, right? But except for that, they would be basically the same. Now, we do actually now know what these are gonna look like, because thanks to that code leak, we do not just get reference to these products
with visual intelligence,
but we actually have explainer videos, and this is how what it looks like.
Savable.
Let's give you the full screen so we can react to that fully together.
With visual intelligence, your world becomes savable. See something you like?
So if you look at these AirPods, Can I zoom in? Oh, I actually can. This video is actually quite high quality. It looks just like AirPods Pro 3 for the most part, or AirPods 4 if you don't look internally. Obviously, the stem seems to be a bit thicker, I would argue. Obviously, they are thicker than on my EarPods. Very different product. So my question is, where's the fucking camera? Is it facing here? Like, is it facing forwards? Is it facing downwards? Is it up top or down below more? Like, I am so confused by this product, and I hope you understand why I've been so skeptical of this even existing in the first place. But apparently, the way Apple is demonstrating it, he lifted the book up, so I would actually think that the camera is probably not pointing entirely downwards. My question is, of course, how good is the camera? How much internal space does it eat up? Is it always on or only after some kind of command? Can it record video, or is it only for stills, or can it even record stills and video, or is it only for visual intelligence inputs? There's so many questions I have about this product. I know Apple is going to answer it, but I hope you understand why this product drives me so crazy in such a different way to everything else.
Just ask me to save it for later.
Yeah, so this video isn't great. It's a short explainer. I wouldn't be even surprised if it's mostly like if it's just provisionary and Apple plans to replace it with something else. That being said, it clearly makes the point that somebody with AirPods is telling visual intelligence and Siri AI to remind them of something that they're seeing right now. Though that input also is not concrete. Like, my question is, well, when is Siri supposed to remind you? Just the book or the title? Like, I'm not going to be too nitpicky about that, but you get what I'm saying. That was just a very basic input that I hope Siri AI would have some follow-up questions on. So this is part of that. If we look what else Aaron has posted here, some additional info about AirPods Pro 4 with cameras. Now, he calls this AirPods Pro 4 with cameras. This, again, could be just AirPods Pro 4, which unfortunately would lead me to buy AirPods with cameras, because I do want AirPods with better battery life, better sound quality, and everything else, though I am quite happy with my AirPods Pro 3 in general right now. But there are even system warnings here, like if you have long hair that blocks the camera, there will be an error that is titled hair detected that says to get the most accurate information about things in your environment, make sure AirPods are not covered. There's also something called secure pairing with the input, please put your AirPods in case to continue secure pairing. I don't know what this means. There's not been a big follow-up on this thus far. But obviously, as you can guess, this is one of the bigger leaks we have gotten in recent Apple history. We've had even bigger ones where entire MacBooks started being sold on the Russian black market, and Russian YouTubers started covering that. But yeah, 2 new AirPod models also found, AirPods 5 with and without ANC, Beats Solo Buds. So yeah, there's very interesting stuff from these code leaks, but the fact that we actually have like an explainer video specifically about the visual intelligence feature, that kind of leaves me now no doubts that this feature is actually real and that this product is actually real, which is quite crazy, because if you know my train of thought on these is I've been saying that Mark Gurman is mistaking cameras on AirPods with infrared cameras, as Min-Chi Kuo has talked about in the past, and these infrared cameras would basically be used for air gestures. Mark Gurman insisted on these being AI camera-enabled AirPods. And it seems like he's very much correct. Now, again, I do not know what Apple wants to do with these devices when it comes to actual camera capabilities, right? I mean, outside of AI, will you be able to take still photos? It most likely you can, but my question is, would it need to be connected to an AI query, like remind me of something, right? But obviously, for that, it would need to take an image, analyze it, just for putting it on your iPhone. So my question is, would it take an image and actually save it, or would it just take an image, analyze it, and then just use all basically the text data from it to work based on that? For privacy reasons, I kind of would prefer the latter, but once you already have cameras, it's kind of silly to not fully utilize them. And again, if you look
With
at this
visual intelligence
product, right, it's so small, like the amount of good camera hardware that you can fit in it is so limited. I don't know what the camera quality would be here. My guess would be we are talking about 1080p video cameras that are basically just maybe like a 2 megapixel, over 2 megapixel sensor, if it's a 4:3 sensor that zooms into some kind of 16:9 video. Ah, God. I would also suspect that the AirPods themselves don't actually process much of the data, and most of that is moved towards your iPhone. That also leads to questions. What happens if you have an iPhone that does not have Apple Intelligence enabled, so an iPhone 15 or older? Granted, I don't think that that would particularly stop Apple, but it is just something to think about, right? In general, again, this is one of Apple's weirdest products. Like, I consider this way weirder than Apple Vision Pro, because with Apple Vision Pro, I at least see the long-term vision to make it smaller, make it lighter, to eventually make glasses based on all the user interface paradigms. This, to me, is very much, we already have a popular product, and how can we make AI a center point of that? And this is probably going to be really good for Apple's stock price if Apple actually sneakily manages to be the first company to make AI gadgets a thing. Because if you remember stuff like the Humane AI pin and shit like that, you know they've all crashed and burned. We know that Johnny Ive is working on some AI, I don't know, pendant, chain, whatever else, headphone, or even it was rumored to be like a wearable speaker with some kind of motoric robotic arm for OpenAI. So maybe that's Apple's way of saying, you know what? With HomePad, we already have a speaker that twists and turns. We already have AirPods with cameras for visual intelligence. You can leave those devices, right? You don't need to use them, especially you don't need to use them fully with all the AI stuff. But we will be the first company to actually comprehensively push a new level of AI into our hardware, right? I mean, sure, Google, of course, has Gemini integrated into Android phones, but we already expect AI to be on phones and tablets and laptops, right? We expect to access our voice assistants with something like a HomePod or with AirPods, but AirPods with cameras and now a HomePod with a screen, especially something that's potentially much more personal than something like the Nest Hub and stuff like that, the Amazon Echo devices with screens, where it's much more utilitarian, much more basic. If Apple manages to make all of this much more playful, much more useful, and integrates it with products that actually sell significantly better, I see the vision for that. But if you ask me, like, would I use visual intelligence in that way? Would I want to walk around with the stigma of, oh, there are cameras in my fucking headphones? Like, if I stand next to a dude at the urinal or something like that, and now he has to worry whether I'm filming potentially or something. Again, Apple has been pretty good at getting away from this, like AirTags, despite all the media fuss, never became a question of like, oh, these are a big stalking tool or something like that. There was some initial coverage. Apple added some extra software and some extra hardware securities with AirTag Gen 2, but overall, it wasn't no big deal, right? I hope that Apple manages the same here, but man, once you actually have real cameras that are filming everything around you, or at least might have the capability to, it just becomes a much harder sell to the general public, at least in my opinion. That also, the one good thing about this is that to me, this makes Apple's glasses entirely superfluous, because I'm already walking around with one AirPod in my ear at basically all times throughout the day. If now I can get that, maybe even some visual intelligence features on top of already the sound quality, ANC, general Siri capabilities, the ability to read my messages, obviously the ability to take phone calls, right? I just won't need glasses that might have a camera that's positioned a bit better, right? Again, I do believe that these will have some issues with pointing at exactly the object you want to visually intelligentize, but I don't think it's going to be as bad so that I would want AirPods and camera enabled glasses as well. Now, once we are talking about camera enabled glasses with a screen, now that's something that's rumored for 2028 or 2029 for Apple. That is something that I much more likely would consider. But then again, I don't really wear glasses. I don't really want to start having to do that. So you guys can let me know, what do you think of this kind of product? I mean,
see something you like?
Right, like, do you think it's actually going to be problematic to aim with the camera? Do you think it's actually going to create a social stigma about you walking around with cameras and potentially jeopardizing other people's privacy and things like that? And of course, is Apple's AI even good enough? Now, obviously, Apple's visual intelligence will rely on like cloud-based Gemini and things like that. I doubt that it's going to be primarily on device on your iPhone. But it is an interesting conundrum. And then, of course, if these are AirPods Pro 4, right, how much more expensive is that going to make AirPods Pro for a feature that some of us potentially will never use and actually might see as a detriment? Like, I already have AirPods Pro 3. I never use the workout feature in it, like the heart rate detectors, because I have an Apple Watch that does that even better. But I understand those heart rate sensors are very small. If I turn them off, they don't actually consume any battery. So I can live with that compromise. Apple added something that cost them a few bucks. They didn't actually increase the price, so I'm fine with that. They improved the product overall outside of that. If this is now a product that has to make space for a camera, potentially has to be thicker and heavier to have a battery to deal with that camera, now, because of all that, it's more expensive to produce. Now, it doesn't cost $250, but $280 or $300. Is that actually worth it? Now, if these are AirPods Ultra and I can get AirPods Pro 4 that are the same thing as these in terms of sound quality, battery life, main processor, but without the cameras, I would easily get the AirPods Pro 4, especially if they're meaningfully cheaper then. But we don't know. And if this year they might be two separate products, what happens next year, right? Because we looked at the product names here, right? Like the B798 that's coming supposedly next year, right? Could that be just a successor to the B790, but also simultaneously AirPods Pro 1.4, right? Will Apple take away that choice eventually? Now, I'm not here to just doomer all over this news, but I'm not too sold still on this. Even here, like in this one example, now I understand there will be other examples, stuff like translate what I'm seeing and things like that. But even that, I would just prefer to much more to do with the iPhone camera. Like, I just don't see the point in this. If Apple still manages to sell AirPods Pro 4 at $250 with a new H3 chip and better sound and ANC quality, and they happen to have cameras, I might be tempted. If this is the permanent overclass of devices like an AirPods Ultra, I really hope that AirPods Pro don't get that much worse in that regard, because that can happen sometimes. I would argue the Apple Watch Ultra did suck out a little bit of Apple's effort for the regular series. Some might disagree with me, but I think there's some points to that. Just in general, I think that Apple should also more quickly update Apple Watch processors and also finally add more RAM to those devices, but that's a different discussion. Yeah, so let me know what you think. Let me know what you think in the live chat. Let me know what you think if you're watching a VOD later on. That's it for the biggest Apple news and rumors for today. I mean, we can have a look if there's anything new coming on Mac rumors. Nope. Oh, it is called Siri Remote, at least according to Mac rumors here. That's interesting. Maybe I should look it up on Apple's website. Slow Horses is coming back. That's nice. New Apple TV 4K to have new Siri Remote. Does it actually say anything? Nope. It just references the code name. You can look at Apple specifically. Oh, we have Angelica, one of our Mark Check Pro Max members, joining the chat. Says she joined right after work. And she will even rewatch it once the stream is over. That's very, very nice. Thank you guys so much for the continued support. Let me actually look at the Apple TV 4K. Starting at $199. Man, that price increase really changed the value proposition of this. But that also suggests that this is going to come with a pretty beefy processor upgrade and most likely 8 gigs of RAM. So that actually is going to make the next gen actually a pretty good value proposition, especially if you look at something like how much more expensive the consoles have been getting. Oh yeah, it's actually called Siri Remote. I don't know why I confused myself. So I guess internally it's just referred to as Apple TV Remote Control, but Apple still calls it the Siri Remote. So hey, I wasn't wrong about that. Cheers for myself. But obviously, if there is a new Siri Remote there, right, I did actually honestly type Apple TV with new Siri Remote. But I also would suspect that a new Siri Remote would also come with a new Apple TV. So something that moves beyond the A15 processor. It's supposedly going to get the A17 chip, maybe the Apple N1 Wi-Fi chip. It could also be, to be honest though, it could be the Wi-Fi chip that's inside the MacBook Neo, because that moves from Wi-Fi 6 to Wi-Fi 6E and from Bluetooth 5, 5.2 to Bluetooth 6. So there are alternatives for Apple to use other than their own N1 chips. We know that, for example, the HomePod Mini is very much likely not getting the N1 because it's just too expensive for a product that's roughly around $100. What does Apple think about a product that's roughly $200? That remains to be seen. So, yes, that's about it for the Apple stuff. Let me know if I've missed anything. So, obviously, had the iPhone camera leaks. We have iOS 26.6.1 and 27 beta 6. We have all those details to the home products that we've already covered, even just from the broader list. Again, unfortunately, no big HomePod, but maybe the HomePad is kind of supposed to be the successor to the big HomePod. Who knows? That makes me wonder about its price. Well, but we'll have to wait and see. And of course, new AirPods with even leaked video. So very interesting details here. That one is very much a confirmation. The other like this is an actual like leak. It's not just, oh, these are rumors based on some code names. No, we actually have video pretty much lending credence to a previous rumor that we now also see confirmed in code. So that's very difficult to argue against, and I apologize to Mark Gurman. I said I think he mistook an Apple prototype with infrared cameras for AirPods with actual cameras, but it seems he was correct, and Apple is going to launch an Apple Intelligence, Visual Intelligence, Siri AI-focused pair of AirPods, whether it's a new gen of AirPods Pro or an AirPods Ultra separate lineup. We'll have to see about those details. I would assume that Mark Gurman over the course of this week will comment on this in more detail, including finally giving his own exact predictions on where this product will land. Though it's Mark Gurman, he might not do that. He might just say, told you so, and then wait for all future details up until the weekend before the event. But okay, that's enough Mark Gurman slander, given that I wanted to apologize in the first place. But before I log off, I did want to react to my, MKBHD's review of the Z Fold 8. It's not, again, it's an MKBHD review. It's not the most comprehensive in terms of benchmarks or anything like that. You know what I actually can do? Oh, that was actually MagSafe at work. I punched it with my knee on accident, and it just flew out of my Mac because of its magnetic connection. Did not drag away my Mac or anything like that. So that's nice. Let me actually go to a website that I know has done a good review on the Galaxy Z Fold 8. And that's GSMArena. Let's see. Reviews. Galaxy Watch 9, Galaxy Watch Ultra 2. There is the Z Fold 8 Ultra. And we want here the Z Fold 8. So if we look at the displays at start, you'll see that Samsung does actually fulfill their promise of about 3000 nits peak brightness. That's on 10% of the screen, and at peak auto settings. When it comes to 75% fill, it got to around 1500 nits. This seems to be about the maximum for most Samsung stuff. They do not seem to like to go, at the very least, not over 1600 nits in this mode. And yeah, obviously with manual, without auto, it does not get as bright. So if we look at the difference between the internal and this is the internal screen. Previously, we talked about the outer screen. They get the same level of brightness. That's very nice, some uniformity. When we look at battery life, it's at least better than the Z Fold 7, which was woefully insufficient in my opinion with its 4400 milliampere hour battery. And mind you, this is in some ways a larger screen depending on how you measure it. And obviously, it still has a smaller capacity than most Chinese competitors, but at least it's not too far behind from them in real world battery life. So that's at least somewhat acceptable in my opinion. And yes, if it's folded, you get much longer battery life because now you're suddenly using a much smaller screen. I think that goes without saying. In terms of charging speed, that's pretty good. 65% of the battery in 30 minutes. That's very nice. Again, it's not necessarily competitive with Chinese devices that can charge a higher percentage of a larger battery in the same time frame. But by Samsung standards, I would argue it's pretty good. When you look at something like the Z Fold 7, the time to a full charge was 1.5 hours. Here it's now 1 hour and roughly 10 minutes, and this is a larger battery. And now this product, just like the Z Fold 7, still does not have the vapor chamber that the Z Fold 6 actually had, but and the Z Fold 8 Ultra at least gets a larger graphene heatsink. The Z Fold 8 is thermally not really great, unfortunately. So things like actually sustaining that peak brightness that we talked about is not going to be very workable. And when it comes to sustaining its peak performance, that's also gonna fall short of some other devices in the foldable category. For one, you already see it does not reach quite the single core performance of other Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 devices. It definitely falls a bit short on the single core, but again, these are good numbers. It's not like you're ever pushing your device realistically that often to these kinds of high multi-threaded numbers. Don't give a fuck about Antutu, 3D Mark, Solar Bay. High numbers, again, still a bit behind even the Exynos 2600, but that one actually seems to perform really well in ray tracing. So this is a weird list of devices that they've included, but yeah, if you compare to the Galaxy S26 Ultra here, you'll find that it does perform noticeably worse. Still good by all intents and purposes. I believe that's still ahead of the Snapdragon 8 Gen 4. So that's nice. But thermal throttling, like, I'll just read it out to you. We can kind of assume that the Z Fold 8 is less aggressively tuned for performance, even though on paper the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 is still boosted with Samsung exclusive clocks. Yeah. After running some torture tests, it quickly became clear that under prolonged loads, the Z Fold 8 can lose around half and sometimes even more of its initial burst performance. This sounds pretty bad, and we've certainly seen better behavior, but then again, even the S26 Ultra throttles to about 50% under the same load, so we can't expect miracles here. And mind you, again, this is a product without a vapor chamber cooling system and an overall, like, smaller product in some way. Yes, it does have a lot of surface area once it's unfolded, but it's not like the chip is evenly positioned across both halves. That said, the Z Fold 8 does get notably hotter to the touch than the S26 Ultra, specifically the area on its back right underneath the inside bottom edge of the camera islands, where the chipset most likely resides. To be fair, our review unit never actually got uncomfortable to hold. Mind you, that's obviously because it's throttling, so it's producing less heat, but the heat still accumulates. So you can see that it's not already there are things where it seems to be falling short of Apple's upcoming Ultra iPhone that actually seems to be packed to the brim with a vapor chamber cooling system. That's also going to explain why the iPhone Ultra most likely is going to come in a bit thicker and heavier than the Z Fold 8. But then again, it's also going to have a 2nm processor and a new Apple-designed Wi-Fi and 5G modem. So it's going to have a lot of levers to pull to be more efficient. Unfortunately, one thing where it's not going to be far ahead of the Galaxy Z Fold 8 is that the iPhone Ultra does not use the M16 OLED material science that the iPhone 18 Pro and Pro Max are going to use. It's going to use the older M14 panels, which most likely is very similar to what's is in the S26 Ultra, is in the Z Fold 8. So just for some comparison, the iPhone is going to be more efficient and most likely going to get out more battery life out of a roughly similar capacity battery of around 4800, but it's also very likely going to be more expensive. I mean, just the titanium chassis alone is going to contribute to that. And it's we'll have to see if the 2nm chip is that much more efficient that it's actually completely game-changing for the overall device. Obviously, the iPhone is also going to have only 2 cameras on the back, similar to the Z Fold 8, while the Z Fold 8 Ultra, for example, is 3 cameras. So these are going to be interesting things to keep in mind once the iPhone Ultra actually releases. Now, let's see what the biggest tech reviewer on the planet actually had to say about this product. I'm going to speed him up because I do not actually want the stream to be too crazy long. And let's get into it.
Sometimes, to find something truly new, it has to come from something that we already know.
Guys, as always, let me know what the audio and video quality is like for you. Don't want it to be too loud or too silent and too quiet.
Just
or
kidding.
me too loud or too quiet next
The
to
Galaxy
the
Z Fold
video.
8 hit the streets this past week, and I've been daily.
Yeah, it's basically he was talking about it being this passport-like, kind of notebook-like design, which basically contributes to it being somewhat squarish at the front in comparison to other foldables, which have like this super elongated form of like a 22:9 aspect ratio sometimes. This is a 3:2 screen at the front. Actually, the exact same aspect ratio as the iPhone 1 to iPhone 4 screens. Now, I'm not sure if the Galaxy Z Fold 8 is exactly 3:2, but that's the aspect ratio rumored for the iPhone Ultra.
Driving it ever since, and I pretty immediately
But they're so similar, even if it's a rounding arrow. It's basically a 3:2 screen.
started to love this thing. You can actually hear me practically falling in love with it during that first impressions video. But now it's past a week later. I've taken a lot of pictures, I've killed the battery a few times, I've got to know what it's really good at and what it's also worse at, and I've run up against its limits, its quirks. The honeymoon period's over. And I still really like it. And you know what's crazy about calling it the honeymoon?
Yeah, the honeymoon period is not supposed to make you fall out of love with your partner. It's supposed to give you a nice transition into a happy married life. So, yeah, the honeymoon period is not really there for you to somehow be completely disillusioned with your partner or something like that.
Phase. It's actually kind of perfect because once the honeymoon is over, you're still married, and then you understand better
Hopefully.
all of your partner,
Unless
all the
it's
flaws
like that
and all the
Britney
downsides
Spears
that come
marriage,
with them.
right?
But you
She
embrace
got,
that
like,
stuff
divorced
because of
after,
all
like,
of the positives and upsides
week
that come with
or
it.
so.
And at the end of the day, you're closer together because of it. And sorry, maybe that's a bit too poetic. This one's pretty sick, mostly. Like, you can tell right away, it's a genuinely new form factor, even though we've seen this general shape.
Yeah, so this is one of the things where Apple has its like absolutely shadow cardinal influence over the entire industry. We've already had passport-like foldables, but they mostly went away because people focused on the design that was more similar to the Z Fold Ultra, or at that point it was just the Z Fold 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Now it's called the Z Fold 8 Ultra. And when people basically started copying Samsung more, but then the rumor mill started cooking and told us that yes, Apple is making an iPhone foldable, and it's very much a passport-like design to kind of unwrap itself into an iPad mini-like aspect ratio of roughly 4:3 on the inner screen. That's what we are now getting. Don't question that even, right? That's why Chinese manufacturers have revitalized this form factor. This is why Samsung is making their first ever passport-style foldable. It's because Apple is making a passport-style foldable.
Aspect ratio before, it's also thinner and it's more squared off, and it's just a different execution than those past phones. So as a result,
yeah,
this thing
but
is
Samsung's foldables are in general squared off. Like, just because like Apple is going to also launch it, but Apple's is going to be notably less squared off.
way better than a normal smartphone at a bunch of stuff, but it turns out that comes with being definitely worse than a normal smartphone at some other stuff. So which do you want first? You want the good news or the bad news? I feel like probably most people will want to start with the good news because, you know, at first impression, that's when you get all the positive vibes. And I think a lot of people will have the same thoughts as me, which is just, look at this thing. Look at how neat this thing looks.
I tried
it's
it out
not
at
quite
the
a
store.
square, but this is a
I'm
5.5.
still not entirely sold on foldables in general, especially at the higher price point, the lower durability, the camera compromises, the more aggressive thermal throttling. But I do like this form factor more than I definitely like that of the Z Fold 8 Ultra.
5-inch diagonal, slightly rectangular AMOLED display. And it is bright, it's sharp, it's a Samsung display, they do all this stuff well. There's relatively even bezels all the way around, and then it's squared off. So it's easy to open and close like a notebook. Like this thing is just awesome. The way you normally hold it, your finger perfectly lines up with the power button, which is also a fingerprint reader. And I know I have big hands, but
that's also
I find
something that's going to be on the iPhone Ultra. Obviously, Touch ID might actually be too thick for this product. Now, the thinnest we have Face ID is on the 5.1 millimeter iPad Pro, which should be barely enough. I mean, the the iPhone Ultra is going to be more in the 4.5 millimeter range rather than 5, but I guess Apple could still make it work. But then it would still require having Face ID here and Face ID internally. That would also mean 2 dynamic islands, including one on a relatively small inner screen where space is already quite precious. So yeah, expect Apple to also have Touch ID power buttons similar to what they have on the iPad mini, iPad Air, and stuff like that.
The entire display reachable with one hand, which is something you don't say about most phones these days. And, there's really almost no reason you'd ever actually need to reach all 4 corners, but it's pretty amazing how much you can do without the hand gymnastics. Like, look at this camera UI. Notice that they've moved all of the buttons you ever need to press over here to the right-hand side. Every single function is reachable with one hand on the screen. And it's funny, the viewfinder, it almost kind of looks like it's cut off at first until you realize that's just what a normal photo aspect ratio looks like without all the normal blank space all the way around it.
Correct.
Like, this is just straight up better than a regular phone. This aspect ratio is also slightly worse for vertical scrolling with the little black bars, which technically makes it better because we all want to be doom scrolling a little less, right? But then when you open it up, it's a perfectly 4:3 aspect ratio and still feels like this little small notebook thing. The screen itself is great. It's another high refresh rate AMOLED with this new anti-reflective coating in there. It also has Samsung's new titanium flex hinge, which does like a B+.
That Apple is supposedly using titanium for the hinge as well, but the main difference is that Apple is going to actually have a titanium chassis, or the aluminum side rails here are going to be titanium. So this is going to make the iPhone Ultra more durable, but also more likely, most likely heavier and more expensive than the Galaxy Z Fold 8.
Job at minimizing the crease, and this all makes an awesome canvas for kind of everything. It's wide enough for 2 side-by-side apps, so I can legitimately do...
Yeah, the crease is also notably smaller than in previous generations. I can even tell you that from my own experience with the product. That being said, it's still there, but this is the first generation of foldables where I would say that I could legit forget it, given the other benefits that I get. One thing that I do not like is this center of 1/2 position selfie camera. Supposedly the iPhone is going to have selfie cameras on the corners of those devices, like here, and then of course on the outer screen it would be like here. So this is going to be a more sensible placement from Apple than Samsung. Obviously, Samsung used to have under display camera sensors. So this was kind of like a little pixel matrix on top of it. You could kind of see it, but also kind of not. That being said, this is also something that I think Apple is going to solve a bit better than Samsung. Not that Apple is going under display with the camera, but imagine with the camera being here, you can see how it would be less intrusive overall.
Videos that you also find online from time to time, and those 4:3 displays are golds, but it's also really nice for I've done with for 2 side-by-side apps, so I can legitimately do the occasional productivity stuff I've done with other folds, but it's also really nice for a single vertical app when you turn it sideways, which is really good for reading.
So you can also see here that obviously if the camera was positioned down there now in this use case, it would be significantly less intrusive.
I just find it just such a nice thin piece of hardware to hold for a long period of time. And I know you wouldn't think 4:3 displays are great for watching videos, but fun fact, this plays back widescreen videos bigger than the Ultra does. Turns out 4:3 is, it's more widescreen than a square, so it's slightly bigger for media. And then, of course, you have the occasional older or newer 4:3 videos that you also find online from time to time. And those,
if you want to watch old Star Trek, that's sure going to be a benefit.
Look amazing. Something the Odyssey. But look, you can see how the honeymoon phase...
Yeah, if you get the IMAX cut as a video release and then you want it to watch on your foldable.
It would be awesome with this thing, right? You take it out the box, the screens look amazing, it's lightweight, it's easy to open and close, it's just fun to use. And then it's great on paper too, like it's got the new Snapdragon.
There are some things here that he does not mention too much, which I think that the GSMArena review actually covered. So obviously battery life, cooling, display brightness, we talked about stuff like that. When it comes to the speaker, they were really not impressed here, giving it as kind of an inferior mark to the Galaxy Z Fold 7 from last year. Both speakers are positioned on the same half of the phone, one on the top and the other on the bottom. One of these is pulling double duty as the earpiece. During media playback, sound is certainly getting directed both up through the speaker hole and to the front above the cover display. Generally, this positioning works well when the phone is closed and held in landscape. When the phone is open in portrait, the arrangement works pretty well too. But any illusion of proper stereo separation and spacing falls apart in open landscape use. That's just the reality of the foldable form factor in general. I guess that's because it's so thin, it just cannot fit really great speakers, not without rattling the device and stuff like that. The speaker setup on the Z Fold 8 looks a lot like on the Z Fold 8 Ultra. However, it's likely that Samsung had even less room to work with on the inside for proper resonance chambers. Hence, it comes as no surprise that the Z Fold 8 is a tad quieter than the Z Fold 7, which was already a downgrade compared to the Z Fold 6. And even that one only managed a good rating in our loudness test. So it will be interesting to see if Apple actually goes notably beyond that quality, given that they tend to focus pretty highly on audio quality on their more premium products.
Dragon 8 Gen Elite for Galaxy. And Samsung is also finally starting to put some silicon in their batteries. Not as aggressively as the Oppos and Vivos and Xiaomis of the world, but enough to get a 4,800 milliamp hour battery in this phone, which has proven to be all day, even with a lot of big screen use. And it recharges at a respectable 45 watts, which is actually faster than any other previous folding Samsung phone ever. They might have just nailed it. But then you keep using it, you know? You install all your apps, you get into your routines, and you go through a few battery cycles, you really start getting to know it and use it and durability test it. And then you start to notice some things that you didn't initially pay as much attention to. Like, not every app plays nicely with these aspect ratios.
So this is the main thing why I'm excited for the iPhone Ultra, even if I'm not going to end up getting it most likely. And that is because Apple can obviously utilize a lot of work that they've done from optimizing for the iPad, including iPad mini, Air, Pro, right? All those different sizes, all the scalability they've done for iOS apps to make them work across iPhone, iPad, even the Mac. So there's a lot of frameworks for there already in place. Android has a lot of that stuff too, and I'm not saying that their first-party tablets apps are bad, but the third-party tablet app situation on Android is just very far behind iOS.
Fine, it's just kind of inconvenient or makes like some awkward black bars on the sides or a bunch of blank space.
Yeah, so this is this looks like Twitter. Yep, that's Grok. This shouldn't be happening at all. There is a tablet app for it. Like, what happens if you click full screen? Is that just gonna switch it around? You also see that it behaves very weirdly with the menu bar on top, with the camera and these indicators. It should just go to the full height. Even if the camera is there, it should still do it, but hopefully, like ideally, the camera should actually be over here or over here. This is actually really bad. Like, this isn't even like, oh, this could be a bit better. This is actually, I would argue, poor to use. And if you just move it to one half of the screen, then you basically haven't gained much except for moving it a little bit more comfortably to one of your fingers. This is really, really bad. And I hope that even without much third-party optimization, Apple just allows us to switch very nicely between phone and tablet UI. Obviously, it will get better if an app is actually optimized and tested by a developer, but I hope that the native solution will work quite well.
But also sometimes it means apps are critically broken. Like when I try to play crossplay, don't judge me.
Yeah, so that full screen, I'm not even sure if that's some kind of tablet layout or if it's just iPhone layout, but with the menu bar on the left here kind of separated from everything else. This looks terrible.
Critically broken? Like when I try to play crossplay, don't judge me, the play button is completely unavailable to me on this phone. Like the front screen is too short, but then also the inside screen is the wrong shape too. I cannot get that button to show up.
Yeah, so this is on the outer screen. It should offer you a version to play it at 19.5 by 9 so that you always have all your buttons. I have no idea why. Like, I get why, don't get me wrong. I understand it wants to give you a full screen experience, but you cannot cut off 1/3 of the app and expect it to just behave the same.
That makes this game literally unplayable on this phone. And depending on what other apps you use, you may encounter way more of these than I did. There is also no flex mode. So you may have noticed that awesomely upgraded spring-loaded hinge that makes it more satisfying to open and snap.
Man, Apple, especially if Apple takes their time and optimizes stuff like Final Cut and Logic Pro for this form factor, maybe it doesn't even work on the outer screen. You have to unfold it for the tablet-like UI. But if Apple does that, then the gap between Pro functionality on iPhone foldables and Galaxy foldables just grows into an absolutely insurmountable gap.
That also means there is no like halfway open position like there is on the Ultra. I mean, you can kind of prop it halfway open, but there is no software mode to take advantage of that. There's also the slightly...
Yeah, but I think the Z Fold 8 Ultra also has a different hinge than the Z Fold 7, so it seems like Samsung is definitely going away from flex mode towards hinges that are just much easier to use rather than much stiffer ones that you can stop halfway through.
Awkward speaker situation. So you'll notice when it's closed, things sound fine, and it's stereo because the speakers are at the top and the bottom of the front side. But when you open it, both those speakers are now on the left-hand side. So you'll notice, like watching full-screen videos, the sound is kind of lopsided. Not gonna lie, it's just all coming out of the left side of the phone, and you notice that. Lining up on certain wireless chargers is also tough on this phone, especially the ones where the phone's like supposed to sit up and use its height to align. Like a lot of in-car chargers just don't work. And there's no built-in magnets in the phone, so it makes a lot of chargers...
Yeah, this is why I'm always advocating for MagSafe. It's not just about the convenience. Sometimes it's just literally preventative. Because when you look at it here, right, when he's just... like if it had magnets, now I know the car might not have magnets, right? But imagine there actually being like a MagSafe circle charger on like this aluminum puck that Apple does, right? You could just put it on top, and now the phone actually sits a bit tall, wider up. You could actually unfold it and maybe even just like connect the bottom part and still have the full screen visible. Again, there might not be exactly the amount of space needed for this in this specific car, but there's just so much that you lose if you don't have MagSafe or Qi 2 magnets. And I know you can get a case with magnets and Pixel ring with all this. It's just no. Like, just build it in front, especially on a foldable where you really don't want to use cases most of the time. There should have been this included. There are some rumors that the iPhone Ultra is not going to include MagSafe, and believe me, I'll be very critical if that actually happens to be the case.
Sit up and use its height to align. Like a lot of in-car chargers just don't work. And there's no built-in magnets in the phone, so it makes a lot of chargers I used to rely on sadly not usable without a magnetic case. And it's also a big-time rocker on a table with no case on. And then probably the most obvious shortcoming of them all, less cameras. I mean, it's a thinner, lighter, smaller phone, so in pursuit of having enough battery, there's less room in here for cameras. So you have a 50-megapixel primary and then a 50-megapixel ultra-wide, no telephoto at all. And these aren't bad cameras, they're just not as good as flagship cameras, like the stuff you would ordinarily get in a slab phone. Unfortunately, most photos are just fine. They're not super sharp. They're not incredible colors or great low-light performance. They're just fine, which kind of sounds like nitpicking, but on a $1,900 phone...
It's a $2,000 device, yeah.
Which this is, just kind of hits a little harder not having some of the best cameras. Most great expensive phones should have the best cameras. And so that's what happens. That's what you start noticing as you really start to get to use this phone. Obviously, you learn it really, really well, and it's not perfect. There's even some stuff about this phone that goes underappreciated because it takes a backseat to the novelty of the new shape, like a lot of the software stuff. This is the first phone I'm getting to test with One UI 9 on Android 17, so that's why it has this fancy new responsive clock on my lock screen that like moves according to my wallpaper. It's super sick. And the thicker volume and brightness sliders in quick settings, and just a bunch of other subtle tweaks that, you know, they're nothing game-changing, but...
One UI 9.5 supposedly getting some liquid glass-like UI elements. We'll have to see.
And not. I also like that you can turn off the mirroring of a home screen and inside home screen. Like, you can have them be totally separate layouts. But I think what I'm thinking about most now that this is out and exists and we're used to it, is what is Apple going to do with their folding iPhone that we're expecting probably in like 2 months? We're going to see that. What can we learn from this in that phone? I think there's 3 main things.
When did this video release? 2 weeks ago.
One, app support is going to be key, and that's going to have to come straight from developers. Luckily, that is one of Apple's strengths, and they've been priming app developers for different aspect ratios and responsive apps for the past couple months and years now, so ideally we don't see too many hiccups like I've seen on this phone. But then 2, thin to win. Like, it really does matter that we're coming back to this shape when batteries are better, hinges are better, displays, vapor chambers, and cameras are all smaller.
This does not use a vapor chamber. Screen is better, sure, in many ways, but I mean, you see some of the compromises to make it thinner versus like the Z Fold 6 still, like the worst speakers and things like that.
Because the thin and light feel in the hand turns out makes a really big difference to make me look forward to taking this phone out of my pocket and using it. Apple, unfortunately, is probably going to do that phone dirty like they did with the iPhone Air by not having silicon carbon batteries. And
I mean, it's already rumored to have 4,800 milliamperes. I think it's going to be actually a slightly larger capacity than this year. Again, the iPhone Air is like the iPhone Air did not get silicon carbon batteries. We already know that the Air 2 is going to have a noticeably larger battery. Still probably not even silicon carbon, but like what, 15% more capacity or something like that. And plus the iPhone versus this is going to have 2nm main processors. So there's plenty that Apple will be able to pull off to actually make it last longer. But okay.
I'm already like pre-mad about that before they even announce it. But then 3, it's going to be expensive. This is a...
But I also don't quite understand this. Don't get me wrong. I think that the iPhone Ultra is probably going to start at around $2,500, especially since I believe this is the product where Apple wants to make some real profit. I do think that they will not go completely overboard and charge like $3,000 for the entry model or something like that. I think especially if they started with 512 gigabytes, which I think would be a smart choice. I don't think there's much logistical need to make it 256 gigabyte foldable, especially on Apple's side. But I do think that $2,500, especially with 512 gigabytes, would be quite okay. The main point that I want to make is don't forget that the iPhone 17 Pro Max is a product that, except for the S Pen, right, is literally better than the Galaxy S26 Ultra in almost every imaginable way. The Galaxy S26 Ultra happens to have one extra camera, a terrible camera, right? It happens to have a larger vapor chamber, but on a less efficient chip that actually needs it. For the iPhone with the SIM card tray, it has a slightly smaller battery than the Galaxy Z Fold, than the Galaxy S26 Ultra. But then the eSIM iPhone model actually has more battery capacity, 5,088 mAh versus a normal 5,000. The iPhone might technically be rated for a slower charge rate at like 37 watts versus the Galaxy S26 Ultra is like 60 watt. But then again, the Galaxy does a pretty piss poor job of maintaining its peak charging speed. Everything else, speakers, microphones, main camera, video quality, low light zoom quality, especially if you ignore some of the over sharpening that Samsung does. The selfie camera is way better on the iPhone 17 Pro Max. It maintains its peak performance much better thanks to its aluminum unibody, even over the... like, I know that the 8 Elite Gen 5 will give you like more multi-core performance, but you're never actually utilizing that. And in some benchmarks, the GPU might give you faster numbers on the 8 Elite Gen 5, but the iPhone will outperform it in real games, and it will sustain its performance better basically than any Android, except for ones with active cooling or like gaming focused smartphones. And that iPhone, that's again like minus the S Pen, right, is $100 less expensive. And it came out before the S26 Ultra, so by the time the S26 Ultra came out, like some people will like mention the privacy display or technically the slightly higher pixel density. That, for one, you don't see the higher pixel density. If anything, the new pixel structure with the new privacy display, I would argue, makes the screen looks more grainy. The privacy display is a gimmick, in my opinion. The anti-reflective coating is great, but it actually has seen a downgrade versus what it was on the S24U and on the S25U. So you're technically better off getting an older Galaxy than either an iPhone or a new Galaxy if you really value that. The iPhone is less expensive than that device. and I would consider it basically superior. And it's a product that came out like months before it. So the iPhone 18 Pro Max, tends to reason, would be even better than that. Now, just from the camera specs alone, I would highly suspect it's going to absolutely destroy the S26U. The S26U, for example, gets the S26U got a wider aperture, right, for its main camera. It got f1.4 rather than f1.8. But it did not improve low light performance that much. Like, sure, it was, but given how much computational photography sits on top of most night shots and things like that these days, it's really not as much as I had hoped. While on the iPhone, it's already better in my opinion. If it actually gets like even 10-15% better thanks to its larger aperture, and then get some extra tricks thanks to its variable aperture, that's going to be insane. Lake Grimes, I kind of hope the iPhone 18 Pro is better anti-reflective. Well, the problem with that is that anti-reflectivity still comes with downsides. Now, Samsung does have one of the best anti-reflective coatings on the market, but I still stand by the fact that the Galaxy S24U and S25U does compromise on its vibrancy because of its anti-reflective coating. The iPhone 17 Pro Max is, I'm not saying it's as good as it can get. I'm sure that you can reduce reflectivity as well there without reducing vibrancy. But it is noticeably less reflective already than prior generations, thanks to the coating on Ceramic Shield 2. And it also happens to be also more durable, and it also happens to be just as vibrant and just as off-angle persistent. The Galaxy S26 Ultra, most notably, is not, even when the privacy display is turned off. Because even if the pixels are not turned off, there are still pixels with different apertures on it. So your eyes perceives those pixels differently, even if they aren't turned off in software. Now, like, depending on how you use it, I can see the S24U, like, that was the pinnacle of low reflectivity in my opinion, being a good argument, right? If you live in an area where there's constantly a lot of sun and things like that, I think it makes sense. That can make your screen notably more efficient because you don't need to push it to the max brightness levels. That's going to help with screen longevity and things like that. But then again, the iPhone is moving towards an M16 material panel that's going to make the screen more efficient. It's going to allow it to get brighter. We'll have to see. How much does the nano texture reduce the vibrancy on, let's say, iPad Pros? A lot. So nano texture is in a completely different ballpark from even the anti-reflective coating that Samsung uses. Nano texture is actually not a coating. Nano texture is actually a small abrasive layer, or not even a layer. It's just like imperfections on the display that are meant to be, which is really, really hard to pull off, especially for like a touchscreen, without it being used up, because at that point your finger might actually smooth those imperfections out. And what it does, it basically does what light loves to do, which is it disperses, it reflects into all directions, because the area underneath it is not perfectly flat. So obviously if you think it's perfectly flat, then light falls like that and reflects like that. If now that area is imperfect, right, let's say like this, let's just do it like this, right? You see my hair and everything, right? Then light suddenly does this, right? And because it's now not as directly reflecting into your eyes, it's noticeably it feels notably less reflective. It is notably less reflective in that regard. But what it does, it also kills how light basically comes back to you, and that makes the image look, in a way, grainier and grayer and less vibrant. I highly recommend you check it out in an Apple store or some kind of store that you have close to you. I really do not recommend most people get the nano texture. I think it can make sense on the MacBook, because at least on the MacBook, you close it up, you protect it, you don't touch it. which might change with the OLED MacBook Pro. That's a different discussion. But on the iPad, where you already have Apple's best screen that they make, the tandem OLED screen, in my opinion, putting that nano texture on top of that, to me, feels a crime. Now, if you're a professional movie producer and you need an external screen that's super low reflectivity outside, sure, knock yourself out. If you're a regular consumer, believe me, that 1000 nits peak brightness from the tandem OLED panel is going to be more than enough to bring you through most scenarios. That's my
$1,900 phone already. Is it worth it? Objectively, on paper, it's actually kind of not that convincing, right? It's a smaller outside screen, smaller inside screen, smaller battery, less worse cameras, and the same chip as all the other flagships. And what's crazy is this is marketed as the more casual version, where the Ultra starts over 2Gs. You start taking bets over at the Waveform podcast on that new iPhone's going to be $2,500 or something. But if you can find the right audience who obviously has money to spend but wants something that genuinely feels new, really feels new, then you might just have something. Anyway, speaking of new, shout out to Ridge for sponsoring.
Yeah, so again, I told you this was not going to be the most in-depth review. This is why we did have GSMArena open on the side. He did mention, notably and nicely, some downsides, like the speakers, for example. But I do still think that he painted a very positive. Again, I do think this is a good device. I just don't think it's particularly great for the money. But he did explain why he likes the form factor, why he likes specific choices. So we're going to have to wait and see how exactly it plays out. I still would recommend it most likely over something like the Pixel 11 Pro Fold. But I do think that if you are I do think most people are not cross-shopping these products. I should be 100% clear on that. I do not think that if you are in the market for this, you're automatically in the market for the iPhone Ultra or vice versa. But if you are, then I highly recommend not buying the Z Fold 8, at least right now. Wait until the iPhone Ultra comes out. Maybe that will actually push some prices for this device downwards. And you will have more comprehensive comparisons between the devices. You will be able to make a more informed decision in general. It's not a bad product, just not, in my opinion, the greatest value product. If I look at any news and rumors, did Apple finally fix their shit with the European Union? That's actually going to be fascinating. I might actually read up on that. Oh, public betas. That's something I mentioned early on. Okay, let's, before we finish up, because we did actually cover the DMA stuff, the Digital Markets app in the EU, even from its very inception. And now it seems like Apple is kind of in the end stage of cooperating with European regulators. Apple today announced changes to its App Store policies and fees in the European Union to comply with the Digital Markets Act. Apple says the changes were made after close collaboration with the EU and the updates, the European Commission, and the updates simplify the fee structure and resolve Apple's disagreements with the Commission over business terms and alternative distribution. If you know, Apple is also currently negotiating with the United States about stuff like this after losing to Epic Games. So we'll have to see. There's also been reports that Apple's revenue from the App Store has dropped because of that. So it seems like Apple's subscriptions and everything are actually making up for a decent loss of 18% revenue from the App Store, at least I believe that was for the United States. So it seems like all these regulations and laws are starting to hit Apple where it counts, in the money department. And to avoid having huge fees and potentially being kicked out of big markets, believe me, Apple is going to act along with these requirements, even if they might think that they're very misguided, as I sometimes do. But let's see what actually happens. The initial acquisition fee and store services fee are being removed for apps distributed outside of the App Store. And Apple will now charge a 5% core technology commission on digital purposes that replaces the prior per install core tech fee. Okay, this solves my biggest problem with how Apple chose to go with the DMA. Because previously with per install things, basically if your app was free, you were fucked. Because if you had no revenue source, yeah, you could do whatever you want. It was basically way better to return to the App Store, or if you were trying to do something that you couldn't do on the App Store, you would kind of have to find an alternative financier like Epic Games or something like that. So with now no fees, like no flat fees here, and a 5% core tech commission, that to me is absolutely reasonable. That's very similar to the rates that you get for the kind of game engine that you use, right? Like Apple creates iOS, Apple creates macOS, Apple creates helps with web technologies. I think 5% of that revenue is absolutely a-okay. I think even 10% would have not been too unreasonable, but given that Apple is just getting this for free now almost, I think that the European Union wasn't going to give them more. Commission rates are changing for App Store apps, alternative payments, and apps distributed through alternative app marketplaces or the web. App Store apps with in-app purchase. Apple will charge a 20% fee for apps distributed through the App Store that use in-app purchase. The fee will be 15% for the small business program. Okay, so is that down from 30 or was that already down? The fee will be 15% for the small business program. That's in line with what it was before. Mini apps partner program and video partner program. So that's interesting. That's higher than I thought. Video partner programs, in my opinion, should be more around 10%. It will also be 15% for auto-renewing subscriptions after the first year. So this is very similar, very small changes to what it was before. App Store apps using alternative payments. Apps in the App Store that use in-app alternative payment processing will pay 10%. Developers in Apple's programs will pay 10%. In Apple's programs, I assume they mean small business program, mini apps partner program. Okay, that makes sense. It's basically lower. It's basically like 6% lower to 5% lower, which is just basically Apple will say, oh, that's the payment fee going away. And now you have to process your own payments. Let's say that's about 3%, right? Or something like that. Then Apple can still make the argument, well, if you really want to go outside that App Store, you still get 2 to 3% more money from it and maybe some kind of extra freedom to make your own, like, one-time discounts and shit like that, whatever might not be available on the App Store as a one-to-one offer. But if you want to go through the App Store, very familiar structure with that to before. Apps that link out of the app for purchases. Apps that link to a website purchase option will pay 15%. Developers in Apple's program will pay 10%. Yep. Makes sense. Again, I like that there are no flat fees here, so any free download or anything like that will not be impacted. Alternative app marketplaces. Apple will charge a 5% core technology commission. Oh, wow. That's all that's happening with third-party marketplaces. Damn. And apps distributed via the web. So now my question is, what the fuck are apps distributed via the web? There is no regular site loading on the iPhone. There are alternative marketplaces, which are kind of the web. I mean, you download alternative marketplaces via the web. Is Apple now offering some kind of additional side-loading capabilities. Developers can offer in-app purchase options alongside alternative payment options in the EU, which is something Apple did not allow before. Apple says there will be presentation requirements so users have a consistent, transparent experience. This is something that I've mentioned already in markets like Japan, where this has been required by law. Developers distributing apps in the EU must select their payment options and maintain those options for 12 months before making changes to provide consistency and clarity for users. I guess that will just lead to everyone choosing kind of all options simultaneously, because even if you don't really use any of them, right, what's the downside, right? At least you don't have to add anything and be at the risk of Apple saying, nope, happening in under 12 months, we don't like that. Apple will still use an authorization process for apps downloadable through the web and through alternative app marketplaces. What are these apps downloadable through the web? All the apps I download through the web in Europe are always alternative app marketplaces. Is there actual side loading now, or is that just how Apple refers to alternative marketplaces? You download alternative marketplaces from the web, but then you download extra apps from those alternative app marketplaces. Apps in the kids category are being used by children under 13 will not include links to websites to complete transactions. All apps that use alternative payment processing or link to a website for transactions have to include a parental gate if the user is under 18. That makes sense. That will still give people a lot of security in giving minors an iPhone with even a credit card enabled, but that way they know that the purchases will still either work only on the App Store or only on websites that are still age appropriate. Apple is relaxing the rules for operating an alternative app marketplace. I think this is probably the most important one. Apple used to require developers to have a 1 million euro standby letter of credit from an A-rated financial situation, but the new rules are as follows. This was always ridiculous. This is not the point. Meet a moderate financial stability bar is scored by Dun & Bradstreet. I think that will be far easier. Are publicly traded or owned by a publicly traded company. Basically, we are talking about public trust in something, that you're not just a scammer. Have received venture funding from an established investment firm. Have completed a financial audit by a licensed accountant. Are a government entity, educational institution, or nonprofit. Yep. These are reasonable, in my opinion. I still think that these bars are somewhat high, but then again, iOS is supposed to be a curated platform. So to me, that's absolutely fine. If developers want to start, in general, being totally free, there's the Mac, the open web, Windows, even Android, right? And once you get some money from that and grow a bit and get a decent financial stability rating, you basically are good to go. So that absolutely makes sense. The change is going to affect October 1st, so there's about 1.5 months till that. These are reasonable changes. I'm actually positively surprised by the European Union not being angry with something like the 26% fee for apps distributed through the App Store that use in-app purchases. Again, it is not the 30% fee it used to be, but hey, I mean, that's good for devs, right? And I actually think that now it's really hard to complain about like an Apple tax here, like especially like the 5% core technology commission. I think that's what it should have been in the first case. So, like that previous one was absolutely like that flat fee, even for free apps, that was absolutely ridiculous. This actually looks good. I have to say, I'm not the biggest fan of the DMA, but I do think that this is reasonable. I think that this is going to, by the way, definitely hurt Apple's bottom line in terms of App Store profitability. And I also think that this will help countries like the United States and other regions in the world basically say, look, Apple, we just want what the DMA wants. Maybe we might not have the clearest laws on the book, but we might have a very aggressive regulatory agency that will keep pecking at you, but will offer you to still charge 26% fee for regular apps, or even 30%. And since that is going to be still the vast majority of your operations through the App Store and stuff like that, you can afford being more generous on these parts. This, in my opinion, looks really good. And in my opinion, this looks very fair to Apple as well. Like, I've always believed that, in fact, these kinds of parts could even be entirely free. If the law actually demands it. Seems like the DMA was not written quite that aggressively, and 5% is, in my opinion, a good compromise. I'm also very happy that Apple maintains things like the small business program, the mini apps partner program. I do think that something like the video partner program, which I'm not sure if that applies to like audio providers, I would assume not, but like something like Spotify and things like that, like I would argue this should be like 10% by default, because these are very low profit margin businesses in a way. So just for fairness. But overall, I like, again, if you're just not happy with what Apple offers you, just tell people to go through to the web, right? Apps that link to a website purchase option will pay 15%. Right? So that's the same as this year. But don't forget, once you create a culture of people being familiar of going through to the website from the App Store, people will also just simply open the web app, right? Don't pay Apple anything. And once you download the app and start using it, you can just log in with that, and Apple will have received 0%. And now, again, I do want to see we are going to get more apps distributed via the web because the DMA was very much focused on alternative app marketplaces. But I don't know. Maybe that really just refers to your first download of an alternative app marketplace. Is there anything else here? So that's the fee structure. That's about the same. That's the kit stuff, and that's the financial. Bloomberg, in a statement to Bloomberg, a European Commission spokesperson said the Commission welcomes Apple's changes, knowing that they follow a close dialogue with the company. So I hope that that actually ends all disagreements. They added that the Commission will monitor Apple's implementation of the new terms. So that now leads me to hopefully think that if Apple can have similarly deep dialogue with the European Commission on things like Siri AI, maybe we could get it by like iOS 27 beta 4 or something like that. I'm not going to put too much hope in that, but I could see it being potentially possible. That being said, it seems like there are no extra news and rumors waiting for us today. We even got some breaking news at the very end. So thank you guys to everyone who joined live. Thank you to everyone who is watching afterwards as a VOD. You're getting some big mark action by the end. I hope you enjoyed the stream. I hope you learned something. I definitely did with those breaking news at the end. I hope we can explore those upcoming AirPods with cameras together. We'll look, of course, at the iPhone Ultra. There will be a lot. But as I said, not everything that's coming out in September will be covered by me in September, because September is extremely busy for me. So expect that kind of coverage in October. But that's about it for today from me. Thank you so much, guys. I hope to see you sometime soon, but don't forget, I'm still on somewhat of a hiatus. So I'll just join you whenever there's bigger news like there was today. But that's about it. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.